You think that fancy purple shirt makes you look like you belong here, Grandpa? Officer Dalton's voice is a blade of contempt, slicing through the quiet afternoon air of the Galleria's exclusive parking garage. Click! The cold, final sound of steel ratcheting shut around a wrinkled wrist. Samuel Sterling, 75 years old and radiating more vitality than men half his age, doesn't flinch. He simply looks at the raw, angry face of the officer, then down at the blood-red scratches the cheap metal is digging into his dark skin. "Your joyriding days are over," Dalton sneers, shoving the old man against the gleaming fender of a vintage 1965 Bentley. "I'm taking you in." He has no idea the man he just assaulted for stealing a car not only owns the vehicle, but half the high-rises in the city, and is the father of the very man Dalton answers to. What happens when a cop's prejudice writes a check his career can't cash? Where are you watching this from? Hit that like button and subscribe to see justice served cold. The afternoon sun, a brilliant disk of hammered gold, struggled to pierce the concrete labyrinth of the Galleria's VIP parking garage. Down on level P1, reserved for the tenants of the residential spire above, the air was cool and still, scented with the faint, expensive perfume of cured concrete and high-octane gasoline. It was a cathedral of wealth, the polished floors reflecting the underbellies of Bentleys, Ferraris, and Teslas like modern art installations. For Samuel Sterling, it was a place of quiet transition, a concrete womb from which he would emerge into the vibrant chaos of the city he had helped build. At 75, he moved with the deliberate, unhurried grace of a man who had earned his time and intended to savor every second of it. He was a portrait of defiant elegance, a man carved from mahogany and grit, his life a testament to outworking, outthinking, and outlasting every obstacle placed in his path. Today, his objective was simple, a drive to the coast to feel the salt spray on his face. He sat for a moment in the driver's seat of his prized possession, a 1965 Bentley S3 Continental, its body a flawless expanse of midnight blue, its chrome grille a perfect, gleaming smile. The interior was a symphony of cream-colored Connolly leather and burled walnut, the rich scent a form of time travel. Samuel ran a hand over the smooth, cool wood of the steering wheel. He was not dressed in the staid uniform of the corporate world he now commanded from a distance, but in the vibrant colors of a life fully lived. A silk shirt, the color of a twilight sky, draped perfectly over a frame that was still lean and powerful from a lifetime of early morning workouts. Tailored cream linen trousers and soft Italian leather loafers completed the ensemble. He looked not like a man trying to recapture his youth, but like a man who had never let it go. And in many ways, he hadn't. As the founder and patriarch of Sterling Holdings, his signature on a piece of paper could redirect the city's skyline. But here, in his car, he was just a man. He cherished the anonymity. It was a brief, precious release from the weight of his own legacy. The stillness of the garage was broken by the squeal of tires. It was an ugly, aggressive sound, out of place in the hushed reverence of the space. Samuel's senses, honed by a lifetime of navigating boardrooms that were bloodier than battlefields, sharpened instantly. He glanced in the rearview mirror. A police cruiser, Unit 12 Charlie, was careening down the ramp, its movements jerky and impatient. It looked like a stray dog in a thoroughbred stable. The Galleria had its own security team, a discreet force of retired detectives who knew every resident by name. This city cruiser was a rare sight, a blunt instrument in a room full of surgical tools. Samuel watched it with a calm, analytical eye, noting the aggressive driving, the out-of-precinct plates, the way the driver was hunched over the wheel as if spoiling for a fight. The cruiser screeched to a halt, parking diagonally across two spots, its headlights pinning Samuel's Bentley in their glare. The driver's side door flew open. An officer stepped out. He was about 35, with a thick, bullish neck and a haircut that was a little too severe. His uniform was crisp, but it seemed too tight, a container for a barely leashed aggression. This was Officer Mark Dalton, 3 weeks into his transfer from a rural precinct upstate. A man who saw the city not as a community to protect, but as a cesspool to be sanitized. A place where his own resentments and prejudices could be given a badge and a gun. He looked at the Bentley, then at the man inside, and his mind, a crude calculator of stereotypes, arrived at an instant and unshakable conclusion. Officer Dalton moved with a swagger that was meant to project authority, but only screamed insecurity. His hand was already resting on the butt of his Glock, a casual posture of intimidation he had perfected over 1,000 traffic stops. He didn't approach the driver's side window. Instead, he walked to the front of the Bentley, his boots echoing on the concrete, and peered at the license plate. He ran the plate on his shoulder-mounted radio, his voice a low, accusatory growl. He was performing, setting a stage for a confrontation he had already decided would happen. Beside him, Officer Evans, a rookie barely a year on the job, stayed by the cruiser, a look of unease already settling on his young face. Evans had heard the stories about Dalton, the transfer with a chip on his shoulder the size of a cinder block. Samuel Sterling watched the performance with an unreadable expression. He made no sudden moves, he simply waited. He had faced down hostile corporate raiders and crooked city councilmen. A policeman with an attitude problem was just another Tuesday. He slowly, deliberately, reached for the button to lower his window, the electric motor's soft whir the only sound in the tense silence. Dalton strutted to the open window, leaning down, his arm resting on the roof of the car in a gesture of casual ownership. He didn't make eye contact. He surveyed the luxurious interior, his gaze lingering on the walnut dash, the leather seats, and finally, on Samuel's purple silk shirt. "This is a nice car," Dalton said. It wasn't a compliment. It was an accusation. "A real classic. Must have set you back a pretty penny." "She's a joy to drive," Samuel replied, his voice a smooth, deep baritone that held no trace of fear or defensiveness. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. Dalton's lip curled into a sneer. He finally looked at Samuel, his eyes a pale, cold blue. "I'll bet. Thing is, I know who lives in this building. Tech billionaires, hedge fund guys, old money. Funny thing is, I don't see you on that list in my head. So tell me, Grandpa, where'd you get the car?" The condescension was a physical thing, a foul odor in the clean air. Samuel's posture didn't change. He met the officer's hostile gaze with a look of calm disappointment. "This car is mine, officer, as is the penthouse apartment I just came down from." Dalton let out a short, ugly laugh. He turned and looked at Evans, who was now drifting closer, looking anxious. "Hear that, Evans? He says he's the king of the castle, lives in the penthouse." He turned back to Samuel, his face hardening. "Let me see your license and registration, now." "Of course," Samuel said. He reached slowly toward the glove compartment. "Hold it!" Dalton barked, his hand dropping to his weapon. "Slow! Hands where I can see them!" Samuel paused, his hand in midair. He looked at Dalton's hand on the gun, then back at his face. The officer was enjoying this. He was feeding on the friction, the power imbalance. Samuel moved with exaggerated slowness, retrieving a fine leather billfold from the compartment. He opened it and produced a valid driver's license and the vehicle's registration card. Both clearly read, Samuel Aurelius Sterling, 1000 Galleria Drive, PH1. He handed them to Dalton. The officer snatched them from his hand. He glanced at the license, then at Samuel, then back at the license. He looked at the registration, a document that proved ownership of this very vehicle, registered to this very address. The facts were clear, undeniable. For a normal officer, this would be the end of it. A simple mistake, an apology, and a hasty retreat. But Dalton was not a normal officer. The facts were an inconvenience, an obstacle to the narrative he had already written. "These are good fakes," Dalton said, his voice dropping low. "Really good. Where'd you get them done, downtown? You steal the wallet too, or just the car?" The accusation hung in the air, so absurd, so nakedly malicious, that for a moment even the hum of the garage's ventilation fans seemed to fall silent. Officer Evans, standing a few feet behind Dalton, shifted his weight, his discomfort now radiating in visible waves. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to point out that the high-quality state-issued ID with a holographic seal was clearly genuine, but a venomous glare from Dalton silenced him before a word could escape. Samuel Sterling did not raise his voice. He did not protest. He simply held Officer Dalton's gaze. His eyes, which had appraised multi-million-dollar deals and looked into the souls of liars, now filled with a profound, weary sadness. "Officer," he said, his tone even and measured, "I assure you those documents are legitimate. My name is Samuel Sterling. I have lived in this building for 15 years. The doorman, Frank, has known me for a decade. The security chief, Mr. Peters, is a retired detective from your own department. You can verify my identity in under 60 seconds." This calm, logical response was like throwing gasoline on a fire. To Dalton, reason was a form of resistance, a challenge to his absolute authority. He saw Samuel's composure not as the mark of an innocent man, but as the arrogance of a hardened criminal who thought he was smarter than the law. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" Dalton sneered, shoving the license and registration back into Samuel's chest. The corner of the plastic card jabbed into the soft silk of his shirt. "I'm not calling a doorman. I'm not calling anyone. I'm telling you, you stole this car. You probably cased the garage, waited for someone to leave their keys, and now you're taking it for a joyride before you take it to a chop shop." "That is an elaborate and entirely fictional story, officer," Samuel stated. He wasn't arguing. He was correcting a factual error, as a teacher might correct a student. This detached, almost academic tone pushed Dalton over the edge. The last vestiges of his professionalism evaporated, replaced by raw, undisguised rage. His face flushed a blotchy red. "You calling me a liar? You, a car thief, are calling a police officer a liar?" "I am stating that your hypothesis is incorrect," Samuel replied, his patience a seemingly infinite resource. "If you will allow me to use my phone, I can call my son. He can clear this entire matter up for you." "Your son?" Dalton spat the words out. "Let me guess, he's a big-shot lawyer, right? That's what you all say. I'm gonna call my lawyer. Well, you can call him from the county jail." The dynamic in the garage shifted again. A woman pushing a stroller on her way to the elevators stopped, her eyes widening. A young man getting out of a Porsche paused, his phone already in his hand, its screen glowing. He wasn't just watching, he was recording. The audience was growing, and Dalton, blinded by his own fury, was too consumed to notice or care. He was in his element, the star of his own violent drama. "Get out of the car," Dalton commanded, his voice dropping to a low growl. He unclipped the radio from his shoulder and let it drop, the coiled cord swinging. He was clearing his hands for action. Samuel looked at the officer. He looked at the witnesses. He looked at the camera phone pointed in his direction. He made a calculated decision. Arguing further was pointless. Resisting, even verbally, would only feed the officer's narrative. The battlefield had been chosen, and the only way to win was to let the enemy completely and utterly defeat himself. With a slow, deliberate movement that conveyed dignity, not submission, Samuel Sterling unbuckled his seatbelt. He placed his hands on the door, preparing to comply with the unlawful order. He knew this was no longer about a traffic stop. This was about a man with a badge trying to break a man with pride. And Samuel Sterling had never been broken. Samuel Sterling opened the heavy door of the Bentley and swung his legs out. He stood up, his movements fluid and controlled, belying his 75 years. He was taller than Officer Dalton by a good 2 inches, a fact that seemed to infuriate the officer even more. The purple silk of his shirt seemed to absorb the dim light of the garage, giving him an almost regal presence against the backdrop of cold concrete and steel. He stood with his back straight, his hands held loosely at his sides, his demeanor one of patience, not fear. He was not a suspect. He was a man being inconvenienced by a public servant having a very bad day. This calm defiance was more than Dalton could stomach. He needed submission. He needed to see fear. He needed to be the one in control. "Turn around," Dalton barked. "Hands on the hood, now!" Samuel turned slowly, placing his hands flat on the cool, polished hood of his own car. The position was demeaning, designed to strip a person of their dignity, but Samuel performed the action as if he were merely leaning against a railing to admire a view. He stared at his own faint reflection in the deep blue paint. "I am complying, officer," Samuel said, his voice steady, "but I want it noted for the record and for the cameras of the witnesses that I am doing so under protest. You have been presented with valid identification and proof of ownership. This arrest is unlawful. The only thing unlawful here is you, old man," Dalton grunted. He stepped forward, invading Samuel's personal space. He grabbed Samuel's left arm and wrenched it viciously behind his back. A sharp, hot pain shot through Samuel's shoulder. It was the shoulder he'd had surgery on 5 years ago after a skiing accident. He grunted, a sharp exhalation of breath, but he did not cry out. He would not give this man the satisfaction. Dalton was clumsy and brutal, all muscle and no technique. He twisted the arm up at an unnatural angle, forcing Samuel to bend forward over the hood. Officer Evans took a half-step forward, his face pale. "Dalton, maybe we should just run the VIN again? We could call it in." "Shut up, Evans," Dalton snapped, his focus entirely on his victim. "He's resisting." "I am not resisting," Samuel said, his voice strained with pain but still clear. "You're resisting by talking back," Dalton shouted, the lie echoing in the garage. He pulled out his handcuffs, a cheap, heavy-duty set of cuffs that had seen better days. The metal was scratched and nicked. He grabbed Samuel's other arm, yanking it back with equal force. He slammed the first cuff onto Samuel's right wrist. He didn't just close it, he squeezed, ratcheting it down until the steel bit deep into the skin, pinning a nerve. Samuel's hand went numb instantly. Click! The sound was sharp, metallic, and horribly final. It was the sound of a line being crossed, of a mistake being made that could never be unmade. The woman with the stroller gasped. The young man with the camera phone zoomed in, his hand steady. Dalton slammed the second cuff onto Samuel's left wrist, ratcheting it just as tight. He yanked Samuel upright, shoving him hard against the side of the car. The rough polyester of Dalton's uniform scratched against the fine silk of Samuel's shirt. Dalton's breath was hot and smelled of stale coffee as he leaned in close to Samuel's ear. "You think you're so smart, huh?" Dalton whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. "You think your fancy clothes and your fancy car can protect you? In my world, you're just another thug, and you're going to the cage." He grabbed Samuel by the back of his collar, bunching the expensive silk in his fist, and began to frog march him toward the police cruiser. Samuel stumbled slightly, his legs stiff from the awkward position, but he quickly regained his balance. He held his head high. He was a prisoner, but he would not act like one. As they passed the witnesses, he met the young man's eyes. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Keep recording," the nod said. "The truth is the only weapon I need." The back of the police cruiser was a different world. The pristine, leather-scented air of the Bentley was replaced by the acrid stench of old vomit, cheap pine-scented air freshener, and the lingering metallic tang of fear. The cage was hard, molded plastic, designed for maximum discomfort. Sam Sterling had to contort his large frame to fit, his cuffed hands digging into the small of his back. The door slammed shut with a deafening, hollow boom, sealing him in the stifling heat. He sat upright, his posture as impeccable as it had been in the boardroom, his eyes fixed on the back of Officer Dalton's head. He was no longer a citizen. He was an intelligence asset in enemy territory, gathering data. Dalton slid into the driver's seat, buzzing with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and self-satisfaction. He was high on the power he had just wielded. He looked at his own reflection in the rearview mirror, a smug grin plastered on his face. "That's how you handle them, Evans," Dalton said, slapping the steering wheel. "You see that? No backtalk, no resistance. You establish dominance from the second you step out of the car. These people, they only understand force." Officer Evans got into the passenger seat, his movements slow and hesitant. He closed the door quietly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile, volatile atmosphere inside the car. He glanced back at Samuel through the wire mesh partition. He saw the old man's calm, steady gaze, the way he sat with quiet dignity despite the blood welling up where the cuffs had broken the skin on his wrists. This didn't feel like dominance. It felt like bullying. "Mark, he gave you his ID," Evans said, his voice barely a whisper. "The address matched the registration. You don't think, period." Dalton cut him off sharply, his good mood evaporating. "That's your problem. You're not paid to think, you're paid to follow orders. And my order was to secure the suspect. The ID was a fake. The registration was a fake. He's a pro, probably part of one of those high-end car theft rings." Samuel listened, his mind a silent recorder, cataloging every lie, every rationalization. These people. The phrase dripped with a casual, all-encompassing prejudice. Dalton wasn't just arresting a man, he was enforcing a worldview, one in which a black man in a silk shirt driving a Bentley was a violation of the natural order of things. "Sir," Evans tried again, his conscience warring with his fear of the senior officer. "The use of force report, cuffing a 75-year-old man who wasn't physically resisting, it's going to get flagged." "He was verbally non-compliant," Dalton recited, the words sounding rehearsed. "And he tensed up when I initiated the arrest. That's resisting. It'll hold up. My uncle's a sergeant in internal affairs upstate, kid. I know how the paperwork works. You write the report that fits the arrest, not the other way around." The casual admission of corruption and nepotism was another piece of intelligence, another link in the chain Dalton was unknowingly forging for his own undoing. Samuel shifted his gaze from Dalton to the young officer, Evans. He was the weak point, the man with a flicker of doubt. The cruiser screeched away from the curb, its tires protesting as Dalton accelerated aggressively through the parking garage. As they emerged into the bright afternoon sunlight, Dalton turned on the siren for a single theatrical whoop, a childish display of power. "So, what do you think you'll get?" Dalton asked, glancing in the rearview mirror trying to get a rise out of his prisoner. "Grand theft auto, resisting arrest, possession of forged documents. That's a good 5 to 7 years, right? He'll be 80 when he gets out, if he makes it." Samuel Sterling remained silent. He closed his eyes for a moment, not in despair, but in focus. He ran through the protocol in his mind. He knew this precinct. He had helped fund its renovation a decade ago through a citywide philanthropy initiative. He knew its chief intimately. He had held him in his arms the day he was born. This tactical error by Officer Dalton was not just a mistake, it was a catastrophic failure of intelligence. He had just captured the king and thought he was a pawn. The 12th Precinct was an old brick fortress, a relic from an era of policing that valued intimidation over community engagement. The air inside hit you first, a heavy institutional smell of industrial-strength cleaner, stale coffee, and the faint underlying scent of human misery. Fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered overhead, casting a sickly pale green light on the scuffed linoleum floors and beige cinder block walls. It was a place designed to make you feel small and powerless, a production line for the justice system. Officer Dalton shoved Samuel Sterling through the back entrance, his hand rough on Samuel's upper arm, aggravating the injured shoulder. He paraded his high-value prisoner toward the booking desk with a conqueror's pride. The desk sergeant, a man named Henderson in his late 40s with a gut that spilled over his duty belt, looked up from his crossword puzzle. His face was a mask of bored cynicism, the default expression of a man who had seen the worst of the city and had long since stopped being surprised. "What'd you drag in now, Dalton?" Henderson asked, his voice a gravelly monotone. "Didn't think the Galleria had any bad guys." "You'd be surprised," Dalton announced loudly, for the benefit of the other officers in the room. "Caught this one red-handed trying to make off with a vintage Bentley. 75 years old and still joyriding. Can you believe the nerve?" Henderson eyed Samuel up and down. He took in the expensive silk shirt, now wrinkled and stained with a spot of blood from his wrist, the tailored trousers, and the unmistakable air of defiance in his eyes. He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. A Bentley? Yeah, right. He probably stole the clothes, too. What's the name? Dalton uncuffed one of Samuel's hands, only to slam it down onto the filthy countertop. Tell him your name, Grandpa. Sterling, Samuel said, his voice cutting through the noise of the precinct with quiet authority. Samuel Sterling. Address? Henderson asked, his fingers hovering over a keyboard sticky with grime. 1000 Galleria Drive, Penthouse 1. Henderson stopped typing. He looked at Dalton and they shared a look of shared, weary amusement. It was the look of two men who believed they had the world figured out, who saw everything in black and white. I'm just going to put down no fixed abode, Henderson said, typing the words with 2 fingers. Suspect was uncooperative. That is the falsification of a police report, Samuel stated calmly, his tone conversational. A felony. I suggest you type the address I provided. You can check it against the valid driver's license Officer Dalton has in his possession. Dalton grabbed the back of Samuel's head and pushed his face down toward the counter. I told you to shut your mouth. You don't have rights in here. You lost them when you decided to steal a car. Now empty your pockets. Samuel was forced to empty the contents of his pockets onto the counter. A single heavy key fob for the Bentley, a slim, elegant money clip holding several $100 bills, and a black carbon fiber key card for his building. No wallet. He never carried one for short drives. Where's the wallet with the fake ID? Dalton demanded. I told you I did not have one, Samuel replied, his voice muffled. Convenient, Henderson grunted. Okay, let's get your picture, then you can have a seat in our lovely accommodations. Samuel was pushed in front of the height chart on the wall. He stood straight, his chin up, looking directly into the camera lens. He did not scowl or look away. He projected an image of serene disappointment, as if he were a king looking upon a court full of fools. The flash popped, momentarily bleaching the room white. Evidence. Digital. Permanent. All right, print him, Dalton ordered. Sal was led to the electronic fingerprint scanner. He placed his fingers on the cool glass platen. A green light swept across his fingertips. The machine beeped, then beeped again, this time with a high-pitched, insistent tone. On Henderson's screen, a bright yellow box flashed. System alert. Family link detected. Sergeant Henderson stared at the flashing yellow box on his monitor, his brow furrowed in annoyance. Damn it, he muttered, tapping the side of the screen with his knuckles as if that would fix it. This piece of junk is on the fritz again. Dalton leaned over the counter, squinting at the alert. Family link? What the hell is that? It's some new HR thing, Henderson explained with a dismissive wave of his hand. Some genius in City Hall decided that if we arrest someone who's a direct relative of another city employee, we get an alert. Supposed to prevent conflicts of interest or something. It's been screwing up all week. Probably thinks this guy is my cousin. He snorted at the thought, then clicked the override button on the screen. The alert disappeared. Manual input it is. Just run him as a John Doe for now. We'll sort it out Monday. It is not a glitch, Samuel said, his voice soft but carrying a weight that made both men pause. It's a warning. A warning? Dalton laughed, his confidence restored now that the technological anomaly had been dismissed. The only one who needs a warning is you, old man. You're about to find out what happens when you lie to the police. He turned to Evans, the rookie, who had been lingering by the door like a nervous ghost. Evans, take him to the holding cell. Let him think about what he did. Evans flinched, startled to be addressed. Sir, don't we need to read him his rights, formally? He knows his rights, Dalton snapped. He watches TV, I'm sure. Put him in the tank. As Evans reluctantly led Samuel toward the cell block, Samuel's mind was racing. Family Link. It was a system his son Michael had personally championed and implemented after a messy incident involving an off-duty officer arresting his own brother-in-law during a domestic dispute. It was designed as a simple, low-level flag, a digital tap on the shoulder to prompt a supervisor to take a second look. It was a safeguard. And these men had just casually, arrogantly bypassed it. They had been given a chance to pause, to reconsider, to ask a simple question, and they had refused. The holding cell was a cage of concrete and steel, the air thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and despair. Evans unlocked the heavy barred door. "In you go," Evans said, his voice quiet, refusing to make eye contact. Samuel stepped inside. He looked at the young officer. He saw the conflict in his eyes, the seed of doubt that Dalton's bluster couldn't completely crush. "Officer Evans," Samuel said, his tone not accusatory but paternal. "Every man reaches a point where he must choose between the easy path and the right one. You are standing at that crossroads right now. What your partner is doing is wrong. You know it, and soon everyone will know it. You have a chance right now to stand on the right side of this." Evans swallowed hard. He looked down the hall where Dalton was laughing with Henderson. He looked back at Samuel, at the quiet strength in the old man's face. He was scared. Scared of Dalton, scared of losing his job, scared of being labeled a snitch. Fear won. He slammed the cell door shut, the clang of the lock echoing his decision. He turned and walked away without a word, leaving Samuel Sterling alone in the dim, oppressive silence. Samuel sat on the cold metal bench. It was uncomfortable. It was degrading. But it was also a vantage point. He had given the system a chance to correct itself. He had given the rookie a chance to be a hero. Now it was time for a different approach. He had one phone call coming. He would make it count. He knew the number by heart. It was a private line, one that bypassed dispatchers and secretaries. It was the direct line to the man who ran this entire department, the man who called him Dad. An hour crawled by, each minute stretching into an eternity in the cold, silent cell. The initial adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache in Samuel's shoulder and wrists. He sat perfectly still in the metal bench, his back straight, refusing to slump or show any sign of defeat. He ran through breathing exercises, a meditative practice that had served him through hostile takeovers and personal tragedies. He was centering himself, preparing his mind for the next phase of the engagement. The silence was broken by the sound of heavy footsteps and jingling keys. The cell door screeched open. It wasn't Dalton or Evans. This was a different officer. A barrel-chested man with a weary face who looked at Samuel with a complete lack of interest. "On your feet. Lieutenant wants to see you." Samuel stood and was escorted down a short hallway to a small, windowless room. The interrogation room. It was a cliché of the genre. A single metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs and a large, dark mirror on one wall. The air was stale, thick with the ghosts of 1,000 desperate lies. Seated at the table was Lieutenant Corrigan. He was in his early 40s, a man who had climbed the ranks not through exceptional police work, but through political maneuvering and a talent for never being in the room when bad things happened. He had a soft, doughy face and small, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He was the enabler, the administrator who allowed men like Dalton to flourish because they did the dirty work he was too clever to do himself. He held a thin manila folder on the table in front of him. "Mr. Sterling," Corrigan began, his voice smooth and reasonable. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please, have a seat." The use of his name was a deliberate tactic meant to disarm. Samuel sat down. He did not speak. "I've been reviewing Officer Dalton's preliminary report," Corrigan continued, tapping the folder, "and I have to say it's not looking good for you. Grand theft auto of a high-value vehicle, possession of forged documents, resisting arrest. These are serious charges. You're looking at significant prison time." Corrigan leaned forward, folding his hands on the table, adopting the posture of a concerned guidance counselor. "However, I see a 75-year-old man in front of me. I don't think you're a hardened criminal. I think you made a mistake. A big one. Maybe you were confused. Maybe you saw the keys and it was a crime of opportunity. It happens." Samuel remained silent, his expression unreadable. "Here's what I'm prepared to do," Corrigan said, sliding a single piece of paper out of the folder. It was a pre-printed plea agreement form. "I can make the felony charges disappear. We reduce this to a simple misdemeanor, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. You plead guilty, we sentence you to time served. You pay a $500 fine, and you walk out of here in the next 20 minutes. No jail time, no felony record. This whole unpleasantness just goes away. We all get to go home." It was the classic trap, a way to legitimize an unlawful arrest by coercing the victim into admitting a lesser, fabricated crime. It cleaned the books, avoided lawsuits, and allowed the department to maintain its perfect record. Samuel looked at the paper. He looked at the smug, confident face of Lieutenant Corrigan. Then he looked up at the dark mirror on the wall, knowing Dalton was likely standing on the other side, watching, savoring this moment of humiliation. Finally, Samuel spoke. His voice was not loud, but it filled the small room with an undeniable power. "No," he said. Corrigan's smile faltered. "No? I don't think you understand. This is a one-time offer. The district attorney is not going to be this generous." "I understand perfectly, Lieutenant," Samuel replied. "You are offering me a lie to cover up your officer's crime. You are attempting to coerce me into becoming an accomplice to my own assault and illegal detention. My answer is no." He pushed the paper back across the table. "I will not be signing anything. I will not be pleading guilty to anything. What I will be doing is making my one phone call. Now." The shift in power was palpable. The reasonable, concerned facade dropped from Corrigan's face, replaced by a flash of irritation. The pawn was not behaving like a pawn. He sighed, a long, theatrical sound of exasperation. "Fine," he snapped. "Have it your way. Let's see who your big-shot lawyer is. The phone is down the hall. Make it quick. The transport to county jail leaves in an hour." The phone was a battered metal box bolted to the wall in the booking area, a relic from a time before cell phones. The receiver was greasy to the touch and smelled faintly of stale sweat and desperation. Officer Dalton stood nearby, leaning against a filing cabinet with his arms crossed, a smirk plastered on his face. He was enjoying the show, eager to hear the pathetic, pleading phone call to some overworked public defender. Samuel Sterling ignored him completely. He picked up the heavy receiver. His hands were steady. There was no tremor of fear or anger. He was a surgeon about to make a precise incision. His fingers, large but nimble, moved over the keypad. He did not dial a local number. He did not dial a lawyer's office. He dialed a 10-digit number he had known by heart for over 40 years. It was a private line, one that bypassed the entire precinct switchboard, a number reserved for emergencies and family. The phone on the other end rang only once. "Michael Sterling." The voice that answered was crisp, professional, and bore the unmistakable weight of command. It was a voice accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. Dalton's smirk widened. Michael Sterling? Sounded like a lawyer's name, probably some ambulance chaser. "Michael," Samuel said, his voice calm and familiar, the simple paternal greeting cutting through the grimy atmosphere of the station. "It's Dad." There was a pause on the line, a beat of pure, stunned silence. The professional tone on the other end vanished, replaced by one of urgent, personal concern. "Dad? What's wrong? Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm fine, son, don't worry," Samuel said, his voice reassuring. "But there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. I'm at the downtown precinct, the 12th. Another pause, this one heavier, colder. The sound of a chair scraping back, of a man rising to his feet. "The 12th? In booking?" The voice was now dangerously quiet. "That's right," Samuel confirmed. "An Officer Dalton arrested me in my parking garage. He seems to believe I've stolen my own car. A Lieutenant Corrigan just tried to convince me to plead guilty to a misdemeanor to make it all go away." Dalton, who had been listening with smug amusement, suddenly froze. The name, the address, the 12th precinct. The pieces began to click into place in his slow, prejudiced mind, forming a picture of absolute horror. His face went slack, the color draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. The smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of dawning, sickening dread. On the other end of the line, the voice was no longer that of a concerned son. It was the voice of the chief of police, and it was colder than a winter grave. "Stay right where you are, Dad. Don't say another word to anyone," Chief Michael Sterling commanded. "I'm on my way. ETA is 5 minutes." The line went dead. Sam calmly placed the receiver back in its cradle. The click echoed in the suddenly silent booking area. He turned around. He looked directly at Officer Dalton. Dalton was staring at him, his mouth slightly agape, his eyes wide with panic. The bully, the man who had been so full of aggression and contempt just moments before, now looked like a frightened child who had just set his own house on fire. Who was that?" Dalton stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. Samuel Sterling allowed himself a small, cold smile. It did not reach his eyes. It was the smile of a predator who had patiently watched his prey walk directly into a perfectly laid trap. "I told you, officer," Samuel said softly. "I called my son." The 5 minutes after the phone call were the longest of Lieutenant Corrigan's life. The moment Samuel Sterling hung up the phone, the atmosphere in the 12th precinct underwent a chemical change. It was like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a hurricane. The casual chatter between officers died down. The rhythmic tapping of keyboards slowed, then stopped. Everyone could feel it. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Officer Dalton stumbled back from the phone, his face the color of ash. He staggered toward Corrigan's office, bumping into a desk and sending a stack of papers flying. "Lieutenant," he hissed, his voice cracking, "we have a problem. A big problem." Corrigan was sitting at his desk, annoyed at the failure of his plea bargain strategy. He looked up, irritated. "What now, Dalton? Did he call the damn mayor?" "Worse," Dalton croaked, leaning on the doorframe for support. "His son. He called his son. His son's name is Michael Sterling." Corrigan stared at him blankly for a second. "So what? Half the city is named Sterling. It's the name of the guy who built half the—" His voice trailed off. His eyes widened. He looked at the prisoner's booking sheet, at the name he had dismissed. Sterling. Then he looked at the nameplate on the chief of police's office door, a door he walked past every day. Michael Sterling, chief of police. The two names connected in his mind with the force of a car crash. "Oh no," Corrigan whispered, standing up so quickly his chair rolled back and hit the wall. "No, no, no. It's a coincidence. It has to be." He scrambled to his computer, his hands shaking as he typed in the prisoner's name again, this time running it through the Deep Link City Employee database. He bypassed the yellow alert that Henderson had ignored. He clicked on the file, and there it was. Samuel Aurelius Sterling. Listed under emergency contacts, Michael Sterling. Relationship, son. Corrigan felt the blood drain from his face. The air in his office suddenly felt thin, unbreathable. He had seen the chief angry before. He had seen him chew out captains for failed drug busts and publicly reprimand officers for misconduct. But this was different. This wasn't professional. This was personal. They hadn't just arrested a citizen, they had arrested the chief's father. They had assaulted him. They had cuffed him. Dalton had put his hands on the chief of police's 75-year-old father. "Get him out of the cell," Corrigan ordered, his voice a panicked squeak. "Get him out now! Take the cuffs off, get him a coffee, get him anything he wants." "The report," Dalton stammered. "I already filed the preliminary, the one about him stealing the car." "Unfile it!" Corrigan screamed, losing all composure. He started pacing his small office like a caged animal. "Delete it! Wipe it from the system! Did you file the use of force form?" "Not yet." "Then don't! It never happened! Do you understand me? The arrest never happened! It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. We brought him in for questioning and let him go. That's the story." But it was too late. The gears of the machine were already turning. The front desk officer's radio crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice tight with an urgency no one had ever heard before. "All units be advised. Chief Sterling is en route to the 12th Precinct, Code 3. ETA, 2 minutes. He has ordered a full lockdown of the facility. No one in, no one out. Seal the doors." Corrigan and Dalton froze. A lockdown, ordered by the chief himself. They were trapped. Trapped inside a building with the man they had just victimized, and his son, their boss, the most powerful law enforcement officer in the city, was coming for them. There was no escape. There was no way to hide the paperwork. There was no way to fix this. Dalton looked at Corrigan, his eyes pleading. But Corrigan wasn't looking at him. He was staring out his window toward the distant sound of a siren that was growing louder and louder, a wail that sounded like judgment itself. The sound of the siren grew from a distant cry to a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the precinct building. It wasn't the standard siren of a patrol car. It was the deep, guttural bellow of the chief's own unmarked command vehicle, a sound reserved for officer down calls and active shooter situations. It was a sound of crisis. The siren cut off abruptly as the black SUV screeched to a halt in front of the station, parking halfway on the sidewalk, its doors flying open before the engine was even off. Chief Michael Sterling emerged from the vehicle. He was a man in his late 40s, built like the linebacker he had once been in college, tall and broad-shouldered. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, but he moved with the predatory grace of a street cop, not a politician. His face, usually composed and thoughtful, was a mask of cold, controlled fury. It was a pressure drop, a sudden stillness that sucked the air out of the world around him. His eyes, the same intelligent, perceptive eyes as his father's, were like chips of obsidian. They swept the front of the precinct, and the two officers standing guard by the now locked doors flinched as if they had been physically struck. He didn't run. He walked. He moved with a deliberate, unstoppable purpose, like a force of nature. He walked up the steps to the main entrance. The doors were locked as per his order. He didn't knock. He didn't use his key card. He simply stared at the officer on the other side of the glass. The officer, a young patrolman, fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped them. He unlocked the door and pulled it open, jumping back as if the chief were radioactive. Chief Sterling strode into the bullpen. The entire precinct fell silent. The phones stopped ringing, the keyboards stopped clicking. The low hum of conversations ceased. Every single officer, detective, and civilian employee froze, their eyes fixed on their leader. They had never seen him like this. This wasn't the chief who gave speeches at award ceremonies or shook hands with politicians. This was a different man entirely. This was a son, and he was on the warpath. He ignored everyone. His gaze swept the room, a high-powered searchlight looking for its targets. He saw Lieutenant Corrigan standing in the doorway of his office, his face slick with sweat. He saw Officer Dalton trying to hide behind a filing cabinet, his attempts at invisibility utterly pathetic. And then he saw his father. Samuel Sterling was standing by the booking desk. An officer, following Corrigan's panicked orders, had just removed his handcuffs. Samuel was rubbing his wrists, trying to restore circulation. His purple silk shirt was torn at the collar. There was a smudge of dirt on his cheek. But he stood tall, his dignity intact, a silent, powerful indictment of everything that had happened. The chief's eyes softened for a fraction of a second as he looked at his father. A flicker of pain, of guilt, of love. Then his gaze snapped back to Corrigan and Dalton, and the ice returned, colder and harder than before. He walked past the desks, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. He didn't shout. He didn't scream. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, dangerous growl, a sound that promised terrible retribution. "Lieutenant Corrigan," the chief said, stopping directly in front of the man. "Officer Dalton." Corrigan visibly trembled. "Chief, sir, There's been a terrible misunderstanding." "The misunderstanding," the chief said, his voice lethally soft, "is that you seem to think you will still have jobs by the end of the hour." He turned his head slightly. "Sergeant Henderson, you were on the desk when my father was brought in." Henderson, who had been trying to merge with his chair, went rigid. "Yes, sir." "You will turn over the unedited booking video, the audio logs, and the complete unedited body camera footage from Officer Dalton and Officer Evans. Now," he commanded. "And if I find that a single frame has been altered or deleted, I will not just fire you. I will personally escort you to a federal prison and charge you with obstruction of justice myself." The chief's command hung in the air, absolute and irrevocable. There was no room for argument, no space for excuses. Sergeant Henderson, his face ashen, scrambled to comply, his fingers fumbling on the keyboard as he accessed the digital evidence locker. The entire bullpen watched, held captive by the sheer, raw authority radiating from their leader. This was no longer a matter of internal discipline, it was a reckoning. Chief Sterling turned his back on the terrified officers and walked to his father. He gently took his father's hands, turning them over to inspect the raw, red welts left by the over-tightened handcuffs. A muscle feathered in his jaw, the only outward sign of the volcanic rage simmering beneath his controlled exterior. "Are you all right, Dad?" he asked, his voice now stripped of its official tone, filled only with the concern of a son. "I'm fine, Michael," Samuel said, his voice calm and reassuring. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "A little bruised, a little disappointed in your hiring practices, but I'm fine." The quiet attempt at humor did little to diffuse the tension. The chief nodded, his eyes still hard. "We'll talk about that later. Right now, I need you to just stand back. I have to clean my house." He turned back just as Henderson, looking sick, gave a slight nod. The files were ready. "Put it on the main monitors," the chief ordered, pointing to the large flat-screen TVs mounted on the walls of the bullpen, normally used for displaying precinct statistics and wanted posters. Corrigan took a step forward, his voice a desperate plea. "Chief, please, can we do this in my office? In private?" "You lost the privilege of privacy when you put your hands on a citizen without cause, Lieutenant," the chief retorted, not even looking at him. "You made this a public spectacle in that garage. We're going to finish it in public right here. Play it." The first video appeared on the screens. It was from Dalton's body camera. The image was jerky, the audio clear. The entire precinct was forced to watch the scene unfold from the aggressor's point of view. They heard Dalton's contemptuous opening line. "You think that fancy purple shirt makes you look like you belong here, Grandpa?" A wave of shock and shame washed over the room. The racism was so blatant, so casual. They watched as Samuel calmly provided his ID and registration. They saw his hands, slow and visible at all times. They saw him complying with every order, even the unlawful ones. And then they saw the assault. They saw Dalton wrench the old man's arm. They heard Samuel's sharp intake of breath as his injured shoulder was twisted. They heard the sickening final click of the handcuffs. They heard Dalton's venomous whisper, "In my world, you're just another thug, and you're going to the cage." The video ended. The silence in the room was a living thing, thick with disgust. The officers, the men and women who worked with Dalton every day, looked at him with new eyes. He wasn't a tough cop. He was a predator, a bully who preyed on the elderly. The next video started. It was the footage from the booking area. They saw and heard Henderson and Dalton mocking Samuel, heard Henderson declare he was falsifying the report. They saw the family link alert flash on the screen and heard Henderson dismiss it as a glitch. The conspiracy was laid bare for all to see. Dalton, who had been trying to shrink into the shadows, was now the focal point of dozens of accusing stares. He looked around wildly, a cornered animal searching for an escape that didn't exist. His eyes met those of Officer Evans, the rookie. Evans looked away, his face a portrait of guilt and shame. The final recording wasn't video. It was an audio file, the phone call. "Michael Sterling," the chief's professional voice announced from the speakers. "Michael, it's Dad." The simple, powerful words landed like a hammer blow. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. The suspect, the victim. He was the chief's father. The entire 12th precinct had just witnessed the illegal arrest and assault of their leader's own family. The magnitude of Dalton's and Corrigan's blunder was catastrophic, a career-ending, life-altering act of self-destruction. The audio ended. Chief Sterling stood in the center of the room, letting the weight of the evidence settle. He turned and faced the two men he had once trusted. His voice was quiet, but it carried the chilling finality of a judge passing sentence. "You're done," he said. The chief's words, "You're done," echoed in the dead, silent bullpen. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, as final and absolute as a death certificate. The two men at the center of the storm reacted in starkly different ways. Lieutenant Corrigan seemed to shrink, his face collapsing into a mask of pure, abject terror. He knew the game was over. He was a political animal, and he understood immediately that he had been checkmated. Officer Dalton, however, reacted with a final, desperate burst of defiance. His fear, cornered and with nowhere to run, curdled into a pathetic, misplaced rage. "He was suspicious!" Dalton shouted, his voice cracking, pointing a trembling finger at Samuel Sterling. "He didn't look like he belonged there! I was doing my job! I was being proactive!" Chief Sterling turned his head slowly, fixing Dalton with a gaze so cold it could have frozen fire. "Your job?" he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Your job is to uphold the law, not to enforce your own pathetic prejudices. Your job is to protect and serve every citizen of this city, not just the ones you think belong. You saw a black man in a nice car and you saw a crime. That doesn't make you a proactive cop, Dalton. It makes you a racist, and I don't employ racists." Every word was a nail in the coffin of Dalton's career. The other officers in the room, many of whom had harbored their own private doubts about Dalton's aggressive tactics, now looked at him with open contempt. He had not just broken the law, he had betrayed the badge. He had disgraced them all. "And you, Lieutenant," the chief said, shifting his focus to Corrigan. The lieutenant flinched as if he'd been tasered. "You are worse. He's a thug with a chip on his shoulder. You're a commander who saw a crime being committed by one of his own men, and your first instinct was not to stop it, but to hide it. You tried to coerce a victim into signing a false confession to protect your precinct's statistics. You have not just failed as a leader, you have actively participated in a criminal conspiracy. You are a disgrace to the rank you hold." He paused, letting the condemnation sink in. Then he turned to Officer Evans, the rookie, who looked as if he was about to be physically ill. "Officer Evans," the chief said, his tone shifting slightly, losing some of its icy rage but none of its authority. "You stood by. You watched this happen. You had a duty to intervene, and you failed." "Sir, Evans stammered, his eyes welling with tears. He's my senior officer. I was scared." "We're all scared sometimes, son," the chief said, his voice softening with a flicker of something that might have been pity. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing when you're terrified. You failed that test today. But unlike these two," he gestured to Dalton and Corrigan, "you may get a chance to retake it. You're suspended indefinitely. You will give a full and complete statement to Internal Affairs, and then you will go home and think long and hard about whether you have the character to wear this uniform." Evans nodded, tears streaming down his face, a mixture of relief and shame. He had not been fired. He had been given a lifeline. The chief then turned his attention back to the two primary culprits. The time for words was over. It was time for action. A ritual of justice was about to be performed in front of the entire command. "Sergeant Henderson," the chief called out. "Sir!" Henderson jumped to his feet. "Bring me their badges." The order was simple, yet it carried the weight of an executioner's command. Stripping an officer of their badge is the ultimate act of degradation, a symbolic stripping of identity and honor. To have it done publicly, in front of one's peers, by the chief of police himself, was a humiliation from which there was no recovery. Sergeant Henderson, his face grim, walked over to a stunned Lieutenant Corrigan. He didn't speak. He simply held out his hand. Corrigan, trembling, unpinned the lieutenant's shield from his uniform shirt. The small piece of metal, once a symbol of his authority and achievement, now felt like a block of lead in his palm. He dropped it into Henderson's hand without making eye contact. Henderson then moved to Dalton. Dalton clutched at the badge on his chest, a reflexive, protective gesture. "Don't," he whispered, shaking his head. Henderson's face hardened. He was a veteran cop who, for all his cynicism, still believed in the sanctity of the badge. What Dalton had done was a stain on all of them. He reached out and, with a single sharp motion, ripped the badge from Dalton's uniform. The two pins tore through the fabric with a sound like a final, ragged gasp. Henderson walked back to the chief and placed the two shields in his outstretched hand. The metal was cool and heavy. Chief Sterling looked down at them, his expression one of cold disgust, as if he were holding something physically unclean. He walked over to Dalton. He held the officer's shield up in front of his face. "You do not deserve to wear this," he said, his voice low and intense. Then he let it drop to the floor. It landed with a loud, clattering sound that echoed through the silent precinct, a sound of finality. He moved to Corrigan and did the same, dropping the lieutenant's shield beside Dalton's. The two symbols of authority lay together on the scuffed linoleum, worthless and disgraced. "Internal Affairs," the chief called out, his voice booming through the room. Two stone-faced detectives, a man and a woman, emerged from a back office. They had clearly been alerted and were waiting for their cue. "Take these two into custody," the chief ordered, pointing at Dalton and Corrigan. "Book them. Assault on a senior citizen, coercion, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and multiple civil rights violations under color of law. I want the DA's office to throw the entire book at them. No deals, no bail." The two detectives moved in. They didn't handle the former officers with any professional courtesy. They treated them like common criminals. They spun Dalton around, wrenching his arms behind his back, the same way he had done to Samuel, and cuffed him. Dalton let out a pathetic sob as the steel bit into his wrists. Corrigan, pale and shaking, put his hands behind his back without a fight, his spirit completely broken. As they were being led away, past the stunned faces of their former colleagues, Dalton looked back wildly. His eyes found Samuel Sterling, who was watching the proceedings with a grave, somber expression. "I didn't know!" Dalton screamed, his voice a desperate, cracking wail. "I swear to God, if I had known who he was, I never would have—" "That's the whole point, you fool!" The chief cut him off, his voice dripping with contempt. "It shouldn't matter who he is. You are supposed to treat every citizen with respect, not just the ones who might be related to your boss. You failed the most fundamental test of being a police officer. Now you're going to learn what it's like on the other side of these bars." The detectives dragged the two men out of the bullpen and toward the very holding cells where they had so casually thrown Samuel an hour before. The heavy door swung shut behind them. The immediate crisis was over. The cancer had been cut out. Chief Sterling stood in the center of the room, the weight of the moment seeming to settle on his shoulders. He looked at the faces of his officers, at the fear, the disgust, and the uncertainty. He knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a long, painful process of rebuilding the trust that two of his men had shattered in the space of an afternoon. 6 months later, the sterile, mahogany-paneled courtroom of the United States District Court was a world away from the grime of the 12th Precinct. The air here was quiet, heavy with the weight of federal law. The gallery was packed, a silent testament to a city demanding accountability. On one side sat reporters, sketching furiously. On the other, a mixed crowd of concerned citizens, including the young man who had filmed the arrest, his video having become Exhibit A in the prosecution's case. At the defense table, Mark Dalton looked like a hollowed-out version of his former self. He had lost weight, and his ill-fitting suit seemed to hang off his slumped shoulders. The aggressive swagger was gone, replaced by the twitchy, haunted look of a man who knew his life was over. Beside him, former Lieutenant Gary Corrigan stared straight ahead, his face a pasty, emotionless mask. He had already accepted a plea bargain, agreeing to testify against Dalton in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was a man saving himself, having thrown his subordinate to the wolves. In the front row of the gallery sat Samuel Sterling. He was dressed not in vibrant silk, but in a conservative charcoal gray suit. Beside him sat his son, Police Chief Michael Sterling, also in civilian attire. They were not here as victims or commanders. They were here as citizens, father and son, bearing witness to the final act of a painful drama. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed. Judge Eleanor Vance, a formidable woman with a reputation for being as brilliant as she was severe, swept into the room and took the bench. She wasted no time on pleasantries. The jury had already delivered a guilty verdict on all counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, perjury, and conspiracy. This was the sentencing. "Mr. Dalton," Judge Vance began, her voice cutting through the silence, "I have reviewed the evidence presented in this case. I have watched the video of your actions multiple times, and what strikes me, what sickens me, is not just the violence, but the joy you took in it, the smug satisfaction you derived from tormenting and humiliating a 75-year-old man who had done nothing wrong." Dalton flinched, refusing to meet her gaze. "Your defense argued that this was a mistake, a lapse in judgment fueled by the stress of a new city," the judge continued, her voice rising with cold anger. "I see no evidence of stress. I see evidence of malice. I see a man who uses his badge not as a shield to protect the innocent, but as a club to beat down anyone he deems unworthy. You spoke of your world, Mr. Dalton, a world where you are the law. Well, in my world, the one governed by the Constitution of the United States, you are nothing but a common criminal who hid behind a uniform." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "This country's relationship with law enforcement is balanced on a knife's edge of trust. Every time an officer like you betrays that trust, you pour poison into the well for every good officer who does their job with honor and integrity. You have not just harmed Mr. Sterling, you have harmed every man and woman who wears a badge. The damage you have done is incalculable." She looked down at the sentencing guidelines, then back at Dalton. "For these crimes, for this profound and arrogant abuse of the power vested in you by the people of this city, this court sentences you to the maximum allowable term under federal law." She looked directly at him. "Mark Dalton, you are hereby sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. 7 years, no parole. It was a sentence of stunning severity, a clear message sent from the bench. Dalton's head dropped to the table as he began to sob, his shoulders shaking. "As for you, Mr. Corrigan," the judge said, turning her icy gaze on the former lieutenant, "your crime was one of cowardice and corruption. You will serve 3 years for your role in this conspiracy. Let it be a lesson to any supervisor who thinks their job is to cover up crimes rather than prevent them." 2 U.S. Marshals moved forward and pulled a weeping Dalton to his feet, cuffing his hands behind his back. As they led him away, he looked one last time at the gallery, his eyes pleading. They met Samuel Sterling's. Samuel did not look away. His expression was not one of triumph or revenge. It was one of deep, sorrowful gravity. The system had worked, but the cost had been immense. A year can change everything. Spring had returned to the city, washing away the last of winter's grit with warm rains and painting the parks in vibrant strokes of green. The oppressive tension that had gripped the 12th precinct had been replaced by a cautious, fragile sense of renewal. The purge had been painful. Dozens of officers had been fired or resigned in the wake of the federal investigation that followed Dalton's conviction, but what remained was a core of officers determined to rebuild. Samuel Sterling sat on a park bench overlooking the city skyline, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the oak tree above him. He held a simple paper cup of coffee. The purple silk shirts were still a staple of his wardrobe, but today he wore a simple, crisp, white one. It was a uniform of peace. A shadow fell over him. He looked up. His son Michael stood there, out of uniform, wearing jeans and a simple polo shirt. He held a coffee of his own and sat down on the bench beside his father. For a few moments they said nothing, simply sharing the silence and the view. It was a comfortable quiet, the kind forged over a lifetime of love and mutual respect. "I got a letter from the warden at the federal facility," Michael said finally, his voice low. "About Dalton." Samuel took a sip of his coffee. "And?" "He's having a hard time, unsurprisingly. He's in solitary for his own protection. The other inmates, they don't take kindly to ex-cops, especially ones convicted of civil rights violations." Michael sighed, a heavy sound. "He spends his days in a concrete box. I don't take any pleasure in that." "Neither do I," Samuel said, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "The purpose of justice isn't pleasure, son. It's balance. He tried to put me in a cage for his own satisfaction. The world simply responded by putting him in one that was earned." He paused. "His actions created consequences. That's the hardest lesson in the world, and he's learning it now. His case is now required reading at the academy," Michael said, a note of pride in his voice. "We call it the Sterling Standard. We teach the rookies that they have to treat every single person they encounter, from the homeless man on the street to the billionaire in the penthouse, as if they were the chief of police's father." Samuel smiled, a genuine warm expression. "That's a good rule, but it's not about you or me." "I know," Michael said, nodding. "It's about the principle. It's about reminding them that the badge doesn't put them above the people they serve. It puts them squarely and humbly in their service." They watched as a new police cruiser, its paint gleaming, rolled slowly down the street bordering the park. The two officers inside, a man and a woman, were laughing with a group of kids playing basketball. They weren't an occupying force. They were part of the neighborhood, a part of the community they were sworn to protect. It was a small thing, a simple moment, but it was the physical embodiment of the change their family's ordeal had wrought. The wound was healing. Samuel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You've done good work, Michael. You've honored the badge. You've honored our name." "I had a good teacher," Michael replied, his voice thick with emotion. They finished their coffees as the sun climbed higher in the sky, two powerful men, father and son, who had been thrust into a fire and had emerged not burned, but forged anew, stronger and more committed than ever to the simple, radical idea that justice must be for everyone, or it is for no one at all. And so, the quiet dignity of one man and the furious love of his son brought a corrupt system to its knees and reminded an entire city what true justice looks like. It's a story about the danger of prejudice and the immense courage it takes to stand up to it, even when you're the one holding all the power. What do you think? Was 7 years a fair sentence for Officer Dalton's actions? And what would you have done if you were Officer Evans, the rookie partner caught between a bully and your conscience? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes this community great. If this story of justice and family resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing for more stories that matter.